Hey everybody, welcome to Ask Dr. Testosterone, starring Dr. George Antouliadis, brought to you by his book, The Bible of Bodybuilding 2, Everything You Need to Know About Training, Nutrition, Supplementation, and PEDs. And today we have a very, very special guest all the way from the United Kingdom. He is Michael Kocsis. He is the managing director and founder of Balance My Hormones, the premier TRT, HRT facility serving UK and Europe. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce these two gentlemen, Michael and George. Hey, guys.
Hi, welcome. It's very special for me because today we're hitting exactly 4 years straight, 200 episodes. This is quite a milestone, and I'm thankful to Ron, who asked me the questions. We have answered almost 2,000 questions now. Michael is actually our 20th guest, so we did 180 straight episodes with Q&As.
Wow.
Michael approached me in the summer, actually August of 2019, right before my first Olympia. And he was impressed by my knowledge. So he visited me in Athens and we set up an agreement. And then, so what Michael does is he is an owner of a pharmacy, the hormonist, and also an online clinic about patients that I consult them on Skype, and we provide them testosterone replacement therapy, but also other hormones. So it's HRT, both men and women. And this is very beneficial for the EU because through this network, everybody who's in the European Union can get prescription and compounding pharmacy, but also real pharmaceutical stuff, either from the UK or from Greece. And this also has played a lot of role in my international expanding career. So Michael also has visited me another 2 times, 3 times totally in Athens, and I visited him also in London and in Birmingham twice. So I have a really good chemistry. We're good friends, and I'm proud to call him a friend and associate. And also we've done twice the Arnold. He was in the first Arnold Educational, and then he participated in the second Arnold Education and also in the Olympia University. And as he said, he wants to do American style British TRT.
Yeah, so it's, I usually call it offering American style TRT, but with British sensibilities. Oh. So we have to take some of the things that we have here and make it work for the UK model and patients, as well as Europe. So yeah, thank you, George.
Mike follows himself replacement therapy. He's in his early 20s, so he walks the walk. And of course, we had a great pool of patients coming from the bodybuilding community. So we also can provide some harm reduction strategies. And this is so good, the timing for you, Ron, because now you decided a turning point in your career, switching from the UGL, the underground labs, and all this cocktail abuse to legitimate pharma-grade stuff from Andrew Miller in Texas, from Line, a friend of mine also. Yeah. And we can speak about health and fitness, but with legitimate sources, pharmaceutical official stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael, I wanted to start off with a question because I know that the terms TRT and HRT, they're often used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Can you educate briefly all the viewers as to what the true difference between TRT and HRT is?
Yeah, I think HRT encompasses kind of a much broader range of different hormones. And normally when we refer to HRT, sometimes it's referred for women's HRT, but HRT in a broader sense could also be for other hormones like thyroid hormone or growth hormone or, cortisol or DHEA or DHT analogs, or other androgens. But TRT is more specific to testosterone replacement therapy, and TRT can be used interchangeably with women as well, because women also suffer from a form of hypogonadism, low testosterone, and it's really unrecognized in women, or it's just starting to get some more recognition as being a real cause of some of the problems, especially when you use testosterone during menopause. But for men, TRT is kind of the main concept that's derived out of originally was HRT. And so it's still not a definitive answer of like, is HRT TRT, but I think HRT would cover it, and a subheading would be TRT, more referring to just the testosterone replacement form of it.
Yeah. So where did your interest in this first begin, Michael? How did you get involved in this industry?
Over 27 years ago, I I myself went through issues with low hormones. It was back then I was in the USA, and suffered to find a doctor that could, had borderline low levels. I think what we'd consider now that they would be low, but back then it was like, you're 22, you shouldn't be on TRT, and I just felt like I had these symptoms, and I was put on TRT. And I met a really good doctor. He's been on our channel before. After going through many doctors, a doctor named Dr. Krieger in California, who put me on testosterone cream and always told me to remember the importance of balance. So I've always wanted to set up some sort of TRT clinic. I've got a background in healthcare administration, an MBA in healthcare administration. It's always my plan to manage some sort of clinic or hospital. And eventually I've come full circle now, back in 2016, when I started Balance My Hormones, to kind of offer that TRT service, but with, as Dr. Krieger said, he said, always remember the importance of balance. Mm-hmm. And so when I was coming up with the names of for Balance My Hormones, there's either, one of them was keepyourpeckerup.com. I thought that would be an interesting title, but might be too geared towards the Viagra market, or would Balance My Hormones. And when I showed some of my friends and family that what do you think of Balance My Hormones? Like, yeah, go with it. So I launched that in 2015. Is when I got the site, and it took a whole year to put things together for the business, which launched in May of 2016, was Balance My Hormones. Wow. In the UK. So Europe.
You have very progressive doctors like Dr. Touliados, but they're few and far between. I think the awareness about the need for testosterone replacement, hormone replacement, is certainly increased. But in the time that you've been involved in it, how have you seen the attitudes change? Because I remember 25 years ago, it was a huge stigma. TRT was looked down upon. The doctors were telling you you'd get prostate cancer. They were very, very hesitant, regular doctors, to prescribe or even to give you a referral to an endocrinologist here in the US. There were no TRT clinics. How have you seen things change from when you first went to your doctor many years ago looking for it to here we are, 2023?
So, yeah, massively. One of the first doctors I went to was actually in Northeast Ohio. He's no longer with us. I think he passed like 7 years after I started TRT treatment. He was an OD, and he was one of the first to have somewhat of a men's clinic, all these little cubicles of men waiting to get the testosterone injections. And it's very ahead of his time in that regard. But there are many other doctors that were more, taking the health insurance model through the different health insurance providers in the US, that they just didn't want to touch it. My family practice doctor at the time didn't want to. He said, no, don't even look at what your testosterone levels are. Don't even measure them. And I thought, well, I need to know because something isn't quite right here. I mean, I've got pictures of myself. I looked like I was, prepubescent a little. I'm exaggerating, but I know facial hair was, I think it was due to varicocele. But in time, and especially in the UK, what I've seen, even in the past 6-7 years, there's been a really big shift, a big awareness amongst the GPs, because the GPs are the gatekeepers. They're like the what do they call them, the HMOs in American healthcare. Was it the Kaiser Permanente model? We go to a GP and they fish you out to the different specialists. Yeah. And they were quite harsh gatekeepers, in fact, to where they wouldn't even entertain it. And we still run into problems with GPs who don't understand and tell patients, oh, you'll get prostate cancer, you get heart attacks. We had one, I think this was in Ireland, a patient whose doctor said his LH and FSH came out low. He was on TRT and said, oh, you don't want to switch from sustanon to another testosterone ester because that will suppress your LH and FSH. Not understanding once you take exogenous testosterone, you're going to suppress it regardless. But this is a mentality and the lack of education we find amongst I wouldn't call them mainstream doctors, but the doctors that are under the insurance model or the National Health Services.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and there's another term that I hear thrown around, and I don't know if this is even a real term in your world. It's called testosterone optimization or hormone optimization. Yeah, where people do want higher than, the normal ranges seem to kind of vary, but as a just a general number, 300 to 800 seems to be roughly the acceptable in the US for a normal range. But a lot of us don't want to be at 800 because that's not optimal. But we're told that anything over 1,000 or 1,200 or sometimes 1,500, you're in danger territory. So I guess how do these ranges? Who determines these ranges? And it seems like they differ from parts of the world to other parts of the world.
So my original blood test back in 1996 showed a low end of the range around 400, 450. and the high end of the range, 1,080. This was like a LabQuest or one of these types of blood test companies. And over time on the NHS scale, it's almost down to 250 before they'll treat, even 200 in some cases. And so these are very arbitrary and almost capricious types of levels that keep changing based on the whims of who's going to be treating them. So in the UK, there's the National Health Service. So if you go there, it's free at the point of care. There's no invoices or anything like that, but you wait a very long time. So that does sound appealing, but if it's free, what value does it have? It's not completely free because it comes from taxpayers' money, but patients end up queuing. There have been people who couldn't get a hospital bed because the NHS is always under crisis. And when it comes to TRT type of care, they're usually fobbed off by the endocrinologist, and they use these very strict reference ranges to limit who gets treatment. And there are some really vociferous, very angry types of endocrinologists that feel very threatened by up and coming TRT clinics and doctors who aren't endocrinologists, like the British Society for Sexual Medicine, who say, look, these patients have other needs. You guys in the endocrinology are just focusing on diabetes and you're not really the experts anymore. And so they're getting really frustrated, the endocrine society. So those are one of the groups, endocrine societies, that set up these ridiculous guidelines through what they call NICE, is the National Institute of Care Excellence. But NICE isn't very nice because they lower the levels so much that a guy won't even get on treatment, let alone a woman. And then as far as the other guidance, the British Society of Sexual Medicine sets the guidance a bit higher. We like to refer to the ISSAM, so it's an International Study of Aging Men study, who in their references, and I think people that were on this international conference, they said there really isn't an exact number for testosterone in which men will exhibit symptoms. It could be as high as 15 nanomoles per liter, so you're getting closer to the 450, 500 range in some cases, but there isn't an exact number because you can also have issues with the genes. So your androgen receptor may have what they call these CAG repeats. So the far apart the CAG, the CAG repeats are on the androgen receptor, the more almost testosterone or androgen resistant you might be. So you may require a higher level than the next person. So these very standardized ranges is only looking like at the middle section of the bell curve, but it's not really representative of what true health is. So getting back to optimization, testosterone optimization, it's kind of a marketing term. I think our friend Jay Campbell had written a book called Testosterone Optimization, and it makes a really good SEO, search engine optimization term, optimization. But my feeling of what I recognize as optimization isn't always just testosterone treatment, but it can be other hormones that can be added to the testosterone treatment to optimize your health, your wellness, and how you feel. Higher is not better, Ron. The higher the level, it doesn't always mean better. And the blood test is a snapshot in time. So if you are on TRT treatment and let's say you're injecting let's just say once a week or every 5 days, every 4 days, whenever you inject, if you're trough level, the lowest point before your next injection comes around, and if you're 800, that's not bad, because if we measured you shortly after your injection, you'll probably be close to 1,500 or 2,000. Right, so you will be higher, and so what you have to do is measure this curve. You graph out where your levels could be at the highest level to where they are at the lowest level, and then you have to calculate the area under the curve. Because if you're always at 800, that area would be smaller than it would be if you have a spike and then goes back down. That area would be larger. So you would actually be getting more than if you're just under your own steam and if you're hypergonadal or just had normal or low levels. So that you have to keep in mind that, but most importantly, you have to keep track of your symptoms. And if you're improving, the quality of your life, if your symptoms have gone away, and you can kind of function as a healthy male.
Yeah. George, can you remind our viewers what the classic symptoms of low testosterone are?
Yeah, so it's lack of energy, lack of stamina and endurance, foggy mind, depression, dysfunction, lack of sex drive, visceral fat accumulation, obesity also, and muscle wasting that leads to diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease. So it's a downhill process. Basically, you become a beta male. And yes, it's not just about how you look or how you lift and how you have sex drive, because testosterone, more than that, it can take you away from metabolic diseases, all right? So it's very important hormone that defines the alpha male and the healthy man. And we have to know that all the elderly people in the COVID ICU were of low testosterone that died,
Yeah.
I want to ask Michael, according to his vast experience, which healthcare is more progressive and which is more sluggish, the US or the UK?
Oh, by far, the US is more progressive.
But we get many notes from patients. Please, can you find me, for instance, in I don't know which state, in Ontario, or can you find me in Alabama, or for instance in
Massachusetts.
Yeah, somebody who deals with TRT, and it's so weird because in the States supposed to be very progressive, and yet there are many doctors that are closed-minded, and unless you don't have below 300, they don't treat you. And they want to avoid basically testosterone and give you alternatives, okay? Viagra, Cialis, they want to give you SSRIs for the depression, or, they want just to avoid, and they believe it's more harmful getting on testosterone than staying hypogonadal, which actually is the reverse.
I mean, George, I would think from my time in the USA with the insurance-based model is that many people say, well, I'm getting insurance either from my employer or I'm paying for it myself, and I got my co-pays, and they see a primary care doctor, the PCP, as the one who should be able to sort this out for them, or they'll go to a certain specialist, urologist or endocrinologist, but they're not really happy with the outcomes and with the treatment regimes of many of these types of doctors. So that's why there are TRT clinics that have popped up that say, you know what, we're not going to be, handcuffed by the insurance-based model. We're going to lift ourselves out of that system. And if a patient wants to pay on a subscription model, then we can help service those patients. Similar to what we do in the UK.
Clinics, like one does, but if you go by the rules, and by the state, they're going to torture you. You're going to suffer and have a really hard time until this prescription, and the green light in order to enter to the testosterone. Well, and Rick Collins sort of shared with us all this, all this sluggish process that, and the negativity and the stigma they have, the prejudice they have about testosterone in the USA as well.
Yeah, it's still there. There was a, I can't remember the guy's name, probably 10, 15 years ago. He'd get his knickers in a twist about anything that had to do with testosterone, doping, something Perlman, I think his name was. But he was getting so obsessed, and he was working within the government to bring down, I think it was part of the whole Belco labs and things like that in the States years ago, from what I remember. So there is that stigma around it. Obviously, there's a difference. And as I've said, because Ron, I was on Talk TV, which was like a national TV program, because I was also in the national newspaper in the Daily Mail this past summer, where they try to link testosterone, legitimate testosterone use with steroid abuse. And so we have to make that distinction that, people that are abusing steroids or, in either the media or in sport, obviously that's kind of a no-go. This is not TRT. But there are many people who end up on TRT because of whatever reason, damage their body, or they just can't live without an optimal level of hormones. But then those people do need to have medical care. So anyway, just didn't want to conflate the two as well. So there are the two different reasons. But yeah, it's a minefield sometimes trying to find the right doctor in any country. Yeah. But we try to help make it work in UK and Europe for patients to. We're the first to offer this American-style TRT, with British and European sensibilities.
Yeah, because I think the attitude is pretty universal. Maybe, in the US with the medical system, it's to treat illnesses, conditions. It's not about improving quality of life. There's very little focus on preventative medicine. It's geared towards people who are already sick or in need of care. And that's why all these clinics have sprung up, and most of them are doing very, very well, because going to your general practitioner, it's a crapshoot, and you're going to run into a lot of people. Did you find that I hate to be ageist here, but do you find across the board that it's older physicians who probably have more resistance and bias towards TRT and HRT?
I think it's a mix. I think you can find younger doctors, younger physicians who are too fearful and haven't learned about it in medical school, who just don't want to risk their license. Some older physicians, back then, there were so many doctors I'd met. And actually, to be honest, so the first doctor was a bit older. He put me on TRT, and then he got scared because of my age and took me off TRT, even though I had this varicose seal. And I found another family practice doctor who was younger that did a few more injections for me to hold me over, but didn't feel well. And he was young; he was probably in his 30s, and then he got scared and didn't want to, treat. And I went like nearly a whole year without anything. When I finally found a doctor who would treat me, it was like a country bumpkin doctor outside of the city, who really great guy. He said, "Yeah, I think you need TRT." So he was an older doctor, near retirement, that accepted it. So, and other younger doctors, maybe not as much. So I think it really depends on their level of awareness on this topic. I mean, there's an old video. I don't know if you ever watch the Carry On films. They're quite a traditional slapstick humor from the 60s. And there's a video back in the 60s. They were showing. I mean, it's not very PC to talk about, because he's got this old man. He's getting called up. He's waiting for his injection. His testosterone injection, because he had to go to the doctor, and the nurse calls him up and escorts him to the doctor, and obviously he gets a little grabby with her, very flirty. You can't really do this nowadays. No. But the doctor sees this behavior, and he actually is playing with the syringe. He sees this and he reduces the amount of testosterone he's about to give that randy old patient. So it's
this was the 1960s.
This is in the 60s. So it's called Carry On Doctor. Carry On Doctor 2 is the film, and there's a little scene in there that talks about it. It's quite funny. Well, and that was in the UK. It was a very British film. Again, you probably couldn't get away with it now, but it was people were doing TRT back then. Don't forget, testosterone's been around since, what is it, George? Like the 1940s, 1950s, I think.
Testosterone, it was invented by the Germans in 1939. In the 1935, I think, in the 40s, in 1939, they got the Nobel Prize. As a matter of fact, Michael, you know that Ron was initially his first physician was the greatest urologist and TRT advocate, Abraham Morgentaler.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He put him on pellets, but Morgentaler is the one who debunked the myth about testosterone and cancer, prostate cancer. And of course, he's a great open-minded guy, the best urologist from Harvard. So I really respect that, because you had the best guidance initially. Of course, his protocol was a little bit backwards and archaic, giving the pellets.
Yeah.
And then he told you, go inject yourself.
No. Then he put me on androgel.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Slather that crap on. But that's a point I'd like you to both talk about, because a lot of lay people, they think they know just offhand what the optimal dose of TRT, and they think whatever they are on or their friend is on, that's true TRT, whether it's 100 milligrams of test, 150, 200. And if they hear you're on something more than what they believe is proper, they'll shut you down and say that's not TRT.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how it is individualized, where there's not a formula that 100 milligrams of testosterone equals this total testosterone in this free test in every human male?
Yeah, everyone metabolizes it at a different rate. Even where you inject it, we've seen a slight difference in the way it injects. So we would see guys who were injecting 125 of Sustanon every 5 days. That's not, we have all different doses, but I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. The ones that are injecting their glute, truly, deep intramuscular glute, they get levels where we'd expect them to be, like 800-900 at trough. The guys that are injecting in shoulders or quads, we're getting a lot lower levels, which is interesting for similar types of SHBG. And that's the other bit, is this sex hormone binding globulin that binds to the testosterone. For someone who has a lower level, they may excrete a given amount of testosterone faster than a person that has a bit more of the SHBG. Sometimes it tends to stick around a bit longer for those guys. And so those guys tend to need maybe not as much. But yeah, there's not one dose for one person. It's funny that you mentioned it. We had a YouTube comment on my channel, The Balance My Hormones, just the other day. The guy says, testosterone and TRT has been wonderful. I've been doing it for 20 years. My doctor has me on a dose of, I think it was like 243 milligrams a week. I feel great. And someone else commented and said, that's not a TRT treatment. That's like a steroid. That's a cycle, they said. Yeah. And so you get this attitude from some people, but it's so individualized. We've seen some older patients that require a higher amount and some younger patients that need a very small amount, either less frequently or more frequently. So it just depends on the individual. And sometimes it's a little bit of trial and error, and sometimes you can look at certain biomarkers that will help predict what might work out best for them. But there have been people that kind of buck the trend. They don't always follow, if you have high SHBG, you need to have it less frequently. Sometimes they do better on and prefer to do smaller, more frequent injections. And the other guys with the low SHBG may need to do, you would think would need to do it daily or every other day, and they may get away with doing it every 5 to 7 days, depending on everyone's individual. So that's not always a hard and fast rule. How it's treated. What do you think, George?
Yeah, I mean, I had a guy, he's 6'2", he was 240, retired bodybuilder. He was injecting 200 milligrams, and at the trough levels, it was 800. Now he went for a kidney transplant. He lost 20 pounds. No, so he's 220 now. And at the same dose, he goes 1200. So with a shorter BMI, you metabolize less of the testosterone. And of course, apart from this HPG, but Connor says, use the minimal dose in order to avoid aromatase inhibitors or to avoid a phlebotomy. So you have to know the more you use, usually the higher the metabolize, E2 and DHT that refer to aromatization and erythrocytosis. So I remember recalling said in the Olympic University, I would use 150 if I don't need an anastrozole rather than 200 if I had to use a little bit of it. Or I would use 100 if I would postpone my phlebotomy for 6 months rather than using, for instance, 250. Of course, this is individualized, okay? I'm very prone to erythrocytosis. You, Ron, are not. Right. In order to avoid, a phlebotomy, because it's pain in the ass and nerve-wracking. So, yes, as Michael said, is up to the person, okay? But usually, we expect that 200 milligrams will reach you close to the 1,000 level, which is the upper range, and you feel good. Ron McLean said that at 800, you feel good. At 500, it's so-so, it's in the middle, And if you want to be energetic and optimized with all the benefits, you need to go over 50%, close to 90%, for instance.
So, it's silly, but what's the highest on average total T level that you could expect to see before you're in a danger zone for
I guess 1,000. I guess 1,000 is pretty satisfying, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Also, it depends on. You could have someone at 1,000, and because of sleep apnea or they create a lot of red blood cells, so they have a high hematocrit level. So this could be a problem for some guys if even on normal doses. So I think that's another thing to consider is how do they respond if they're on a much higher dose, if the levels go up to 1,500 or 2,000 because you measured at the wrong time. That's one thing. If it's that way all the time on the trough, then you'd have to watch and see what other detrimental effects if any, is it having? Is it thickening the blood? If that's probably the biggest problem. Wouldn't you say, George? If they're getting a high hemoglobin,
the majority, yes. Also, the steroids are treating anemia. So the flip side of the coin will say, by prolonged use will lead to erythrocytosis. That's how stamina is improved, though, and lack of endurance. But also, it's up to the SHBG. Some people have very high SHBG, 100, and they don't feel this euphoric feeling of 1,000 testosterone because the free testosterone is below 50% suppressed.
So then they would need a larger dose, even if the total is higher. You can calculate out the free, and we prefer. Is my camera on?
Yeah, you look fine.
Yeah, sorry. We prefer the what do you call it? I lost train of thought now.
Talk about doses.
Oh yeah, so if we prefer the calculated free testosterone measurement versus the assay because it depends on if you get the equilibrium dialysis assay, which is hard to find anywhere, depending which lab you go to. So if you can get the albumin, the SHBG, the total testosterone, some of the studies show that the calculated free testosterone is nearly as accurate, especially when it sits more in the middle of the range than the free testosterone assay. So if you look at the free testosterone, like George said, in cases of high SHBG, and if it's in the optimal range, the high, maybe even higher end of normal, I think that's okay. That's a good way to look at it, even if the total is higher than the doctor would like.
Ron, I want to ask you now. You're running 2 weeks with the Frontline Clinic.
Yeah.
Do you feel do you have the same doses that you're using yourself?
No. So I'm down to 280 a week of the testosterone and 100 a week of the DECA, which is, I was doing 400 tests and 200 DECA every week for, years and years.
Maybe, you don't know, maybe those were underdosed.
Yeah. See, I don't know. So when I say I was doing 400 milligrams of tests, it was underground. I don't know where that stuff came from. And I don't know.
How do you feel now?
I feel exactly the same.
Really?
Exactly the
same.
So
no worse, no better?
No worse, no better. Yeah. But
matters of mood or strength or erections or what?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's too soon. Maybe it's too soon for me to comment. Maybe I need another couple of weeks. But right now, I don't notice any difference at all, which is, probably a good thing, because I'm to be using less than what I thought when I was purportedly using and feel the same. Either that tells me that I was using less before and didn't know it, or just the pharma quality of the gear is so much better. Michael, I have to backtrack to one thing, because I think people are going to pick up on it. When you talked about the trough levels were lower when you inject in either the shoulder or the quad versus deep into the glute, what's the reasoning behind that? Do we metabolize faster?
It's a smaller muscle group, so that it doesn't create as much as a depot effect. Now, of course, lots of people are doing these subcutaneous injections, and this completely, I've always said, changes the expected outcome of where the level should be compared to an intramuscular injection. So people end up injecting more or a higher concentration, though you have to only do a small volume under 0.5, and they end up getting less because it's not getting through the capillary bed as easily. And so for some people, they feel, oh, that slows it down, that's better, but maybe you just should use less in the first place and do an intramuscular. And Dr. George recommends the shoulder with the small insulin needle, which is still intramuscular, provided you don't have a lot of fat on it.
Usually, the shoulder does not have a lot of thickness of subcutaneous fat. So we inject straight to the muscle. To the muscle, that means the bloodstream.
Yeah.
If you're flat, you inject into the fat, it will absorb the day after. It's very pure, the vascular supply into the subcutaneous. So it's more stubborn to be absorbed. And usually you can create some lumps injecting oil into the fat. But as the late John Glisser mentioned, who was a pioneer in doing that, is you avoid the deep scar tissue that it's edible, that's being produced in the glute rather than fat.
Yes, but that he's making an assumption. I've also spoken to people like Dr. Kathy O'Neill Smith and some other doctors that say, well, do you know what? There's more vasculature in the muscle than there is in the subcutaneous area. Therefore, that vasculature will repair and heal any potential scar tissue faster than if it's sitting in there. And I've seen some really nasty ones. People have put this on our Facebook forum, this Balance Performance Facebook forum, where they post a picture of these massive lumps. In fact, the lump looked so bad, it looked like a mini boob, a mini breast, to where the Facebook algorithm gave me like a community warning for putting nudity on it. And it was the guy's lump from his injections. I had to say, hey, hang on a minute, that's not right. That's not what we showed. We showed, and so then they let it go through. But I mean, that is how bad the actual injection was in some people. And I've had it myself where I've used subcutaneous injections causing the lumps, the bumps, or even the bruises, the hematoma. So if you go with your shirt off, or if you're doing any kind of modeling, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to go away.
And apart from this, it's really more painful deep in the butt rather than doing shallow, okay?
Well, but even so, once you get through the skin, and this is what's so funny about the ones that love the subcutaneous ones, because they're allegedly, and I'm not minimizing the fear that people have around needles, but they're a bit needle phobic. But most of the pain receptors are in the skin. As it first goes into the skin is where you feel the pain. Or if you have the alcohol swab on it.
Yeah, but the gauge of the insulin is so tiny that it penetrates, you don't feel anything rather than that dip in the butt that it's ouch.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual, but generally speaking, you're injecting with a 25 gauge needle or even 23 gauge. And actually, I find a 23 gauge becomes more comfortable than a 25 gauge because you don't have to use as much force to get the oil out. So this way, you're not creating as much damage. So again, it's horses for courses, depending on what one prefers, as long as they're getting an optimal level of testosterone and the proper absorption. I mean, I suppose you can liken subcutaneous injections to using the cream. If you can do subcutaneous every single day and you're waiting for the absorption through the subcutaneous layer, you may as well put the cream on. You'll probably get the same or better effect, especially with the DHT conversion rather than the extra aromatase.
The cream is the best protocol for stability. You get every day your dose, and you don't have fluctuations in the metabolites, and it's painless, it's needleless, you don't have blood. It's a little bit the cost more expensive, but it's very convenient.
It's interesting, Ron, what you said about Dr. Morgenthau having on the androgels and some of the other commercially available prescriptions, and some of the doctors that do the research, and I've seen some in the UK, they'll take what the pharmaceutical company gives them. So in the UK, we've got Nebido. I think in the US, it's called Avid. You do this 4 milliliter injection, 1,000 milligrams of testosterone on decanoate, once every 8 to 12 weeks.
Wow.
And it's a big injection. It's a painful injection. It should be done by healthcare professionals. So you have to go into the office and doing it. But some of the more university types will kind of gravitate towards a pharmaceutical company. They've got a nice symbiotic relationship there, because this is the more accepted mainstream ways of doing it, where the compounded creams are not FDA approved, and so therefore they would most likely, when they were writing papers, probably do it around the commercially prepared testosterone. But that doesn't mean that compounding doesn't work, because we see it does.
Actually, it's liposomal, unlike the cheap alcohol-based commercialized testosterone that, there are 2%, unlike the liposomal compound, which is 20%.
Absolutely.
So let's talk real quickly about, your clinic, Michael, also serves women as well as men.
Yes.
What are women? Because I think that's a lot of people, that's going to seem really odd. Like, why would women need hormone replacement? We're well aware that women lose their hormone profiles change drastically at menopause. Are you typically dealing with postmenopausal women or a lot of women across the board? Like, what are women's hormonal treatment needs?
So we get quite a few women who are perimenopausal, so before they reach menopause, but you also get women who have kind of been damaged from long-term birth control, who just can't get their hormones balanced. And this is happening more and more. And if you think about it, we always are very cautious about young men doing TRT, because they're going to upset the, HPTA axis. Well, we're doing this all the time to women who get on birth control, because you're upsetting the natural balance of the hormones. But we don't think twice about giving a 16-year-old, 18-year-old female birth control, which is just a set of hormones to disrupt their natural production. But yet men, oh no, you can't have that. And yet these women, yes, the women eventually recover. So do men that take testosterone. When they're a bit younger, they eventually recover their levels, but they're never feeling great, just like some women after birth control never feel as optimized as they could be. And so therefore, they may benefit from additional estradiol, progesterone, and a bit of testosterone. And in menopausal women, we know when you give testosterone along with the whole HRT cocktail, that there's actually a reduction in breast cancer in those women who have testosterone added to the mix, as well as progesterone for other, for preventing any sort of overgrowth of the uterus.
Yeah, that's that cancer word it's obviously it's a very shocking word whenever we say it, but there still is that association in the minds of a lot of ignorant, uninformed people. TRT is going to lead to cancer. Do you both of you still run into that misconception a lot, and how do you educate people that this is not the case? Yeah,
sometimes. I think Dr. Morgenthau has done a nice job to get the word out about the saturation model, but it's not accepted by everyone. And I think there's still a fear in men. I mean, you can have a benign prostate enlargement, which is non-cancerous growth, and sometimes that will raise the PSA in men, or men could have, because we regularly monitor the PSA. So there's a recent study that's come out that in the past 10 or 12 years, lots of the American societies, as well as the NHS, they have stopped doing routine screening for PSA. And what they found now is, because they're not looking, they're not finding. And the thought was, well, there was an over-treatment of men and lots of extra worry and anxiety around finding something that was so small that would probably never grow into a malignant form of cancer anyway. And so as a result, then they stopped looking. But when you're on TRT, in many ways, you're having more frequent you're monitoring the PSA, at least yearly, if not every 6 months. And then you're able to see trends in that so you are getting probably the best screening compared to the general population who aren't on TRT. Not to mention the linkage between testosterone and cancer is they found that if you have low levels of testosterone, you're at a higher, much greater risk of a more malignant, a more insidious form of prostate cancer that will spread. And so testosterone, TRT may actually help prevent, or having optimal testosterone of your own, if it's possible, may help prevent a more malignant form of cancer.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Spatini in that show said that not only testosterone does not lead to cancer, but men with prostate cancer that are receiving TRT live more years than people that get castrated and remove the gland. Crazy, huh?
Yeah. Wow. You need testosterone. And I think...
and Ron McLean is a prostate cancer survivor while on TRT.
Wow.
He talks about the estrogen. in his book, in his new book that's coming out, he talks about the other forms of estrogen that may throw off this weird balance with the prostate.
And her talk said that low testosterone can proliferate and high estrogen proliferate the cancer cells of the prostatic gland. So it's risky having low testosterone. And actually, if you don't manage your estrogens while on TRT, and especially while on cancer.
You know, this, I'd like you to both comment on something that I used to talk about with Dr. O'Connor fairly frequently, is that at least in the US and hopefully not too much in Europe, but we have this whole movement against so-called toxic masculinity, that being a man and traditional masculine traits, characteristics are bad, they're wrong. And testosterone therapy, unfortunately, gets lumped into that, because anything that's going to help a man be more masculine and virile and strong is looked down upon, as if men are just supposed to age out. You know, I wouldn't say gracefully, but they're supposed to go out to pasture like an old cow or a horse or something. And you know, how do you combat that attitude? Because it's very, very prevalent that men aren't supposed to keep looking and feeling their best. We're just supposed to let nature take its course.
I mean, I think you can look at it two ways. I mean, on one hand, if a man's a bell end, you know, at the end of the day, regardless of they're on TRT or not, you know, that shouldn't be conflated with toxic masculinity, right? Because you can also have women who are as nice either. So maybe that's a little bit what's happening, that, you know, sometimes they see, you know, maybe what the worst of men, worst examples, and think all men are like that, therefore we need to stop all the testosterone. I think it was that James Cameron had, the Avatar guy, made some comment about, you know, oh, testosterone is the worst thing that you could have. But no, it's actually not the worst. It's the best thing that you could have. It's kind of like what you do with it and what kind of person you are, you know, and other things that you do to prevent that and to be a good person. So I think there's a backlash, and you see it lots on social media, against this attack against toxic masculinity, because I just think it's a silly concept. I mean, men need to be men, and I think there has been, and we should support men for wanting, you know, to be what kind of how you're biologically programmed. You have testosterone. It doesn't make you more aggressive, but it will give you maybe more of a better cognitive function. You know, it might give you a bit more of a drive. But can also make you calmer. And we see some men, the grumpy old man syndrome, you know, the ones that aren't very nice, like I said, bell ends, that come in, that, you know, eventually get on testosterone, they feel better. But we've also seen men that are very short fused, right? And they lose their rag very easily before TRT, but they still tend to have a little bit of that on TRT. So there may be other factors that are involved. But I think it's almost like a war against, it seems like a war against men, but we've got to make sure as men we don't take it too far the other way and become misogynistic either. So there's a really, really fine balance to you know, how it appears.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I'm just curious, your clinic services United Kingdom and all of Europe, is that correct?
Yeah, there's a few countries that are more difficult to service, so we could do a consultation only. I think the only ones that are difficult are Austria, Sweden, and Norway. Switzerland's about 50-50 because we do have some options in Switzerland, but Norway's really difficult. You know, shame on them. They point the finger if you look more muscly than you ought to. Then they try to go to your home and see if you've got any testosterone. Sweden, I joke with Sweden because they decided they're not really part of the EU anymore because they won't accept medication from other EU countries. So those are the kind of two bad ones. But usually everywhere else, we don't have a problem. You know, we've got the EU doctors, EU pharmacy, so we can support Europe, and of course all throughout the UK and Ireland as well. Well, Ireland's part of the EU, but Northern Ireland for the UK. So,
yeah, and I mean, it's obviously you're getting a lot of inquiries from people in the US, which is insane to me because we have plenty of clinics running out of the USA. I don't know why they would, you know, maybe you're just that much more appealing. You do have a great name, Balance My Hormones.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you know, watch this space. You never know which, you know, we want to be able to serve however we can, you know, everyone that has an interest in what we're about. And, you know, people in the USA can come to our Facebook group, Balance My Hormones, excuse me, and they can learn a little bit about TRT. They can come to our YouTube channel where we have, you know, good information about TRT, HRT, and some other types of topics kind of around the men's health and women's health space. So there are ways that people in the USA can get involved, but yeah, it's interesting.
Okay. If I could have one final question, Michael, it would be if you could immediately clear up and educate everyone on one misconception about TRT or HRT, what would that be?
Well, that's a good one. One misconception about TRT, HRT. I think one big misconception people say if you do TRT or HRT, it's going to shorten your life. And I think with some of the data around hormones and TRT in particular about testosterone helping increase an enzyme called telomerase that lengthens your telomeres. So those are the ends of your chromosomes that will shorten, they believe, as you age. And if you can cap those or prevent those from shortening through that enzyme telomerase, then maybe you can undo some of the negatives aspects of aging. So in reality, no, testosterone isn't shortening your life. And some men, as I've mentioned in some of my videos, feel like they're being really naughty. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but I have to do this because I want the muscle. I have to do this, but it's, there's going to be give and take. There's going to be a downside to this. And I would say that no, that's a bit of a misconception. I mean, obviously, if there are other comorbidities, if you're not managing other bits, but generally speaking, if you have testosterone optimization or a balanced testosterone approach, then you should, along with other exercise and diet, that would be the second one. I got the second one is you can't just expect testosterone to do all the hard work. You have to put in the work yourself. You have to focus on diet and exercise, and then you'll see yourself kind of blossom into the man that you need to be. Of course, should I put blossom and men in the same phrase? I don't know if that would fit the masculinity conversation.
No, that's fine. We can blossom. We can blossom. So, Dr. George, what are your closing thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, so we age because our hormones decline. I believe that aging has to do with low testosterone, and men become more fragile due to low testosterone. And actually, low testosterone is linked to high mortality rates. And Michael, please share with the people where we can find Balance My Hormones in the social media and how to start a process monitoring their TRT and get the blood panel, because you offer also blood tests, right?
Yeah, so Balance My Hormones is like three little divisions in one. So we have a standalone blood testing service. So you don't necessarily have to be going through the process of TRT to use our blood testing service, which you can find at balancemyhormones.co.uk, and right on the front of our website it's got blood tests for men and women. We also have a pharmacy called the Hormonist, and we also have obviously the doctor medical service, including with Dr. George Triatos, the harm reduction side of things. So they can contact us. Just go to balancemyhormones.co.uk and you can get the information you need. You can also find our Facebook group from there, as well as our YouTube page, or you can just search us on YouTube or a Facebook group on that's Balance My Hormones. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. This has been very educational. So many misconceptions and myths surrounding TRT and HRT, but at the same time, there's a lot of hope because there's a lot of interest in it. And a lot of men are coming around to the fact that we don't have to age necessarily the way that our forefathers did, because we have options. We have advanced medical treatments that our grandparents and great grandparents they didn't exist back then. So I think you're doing God's work personally. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. No, appreciate that. I feel like we're helping people every day.
Dr. George, working with you, obviously you're helping so many men out there and some women too. So thank you both for what you do for all your patients and clients. So that's it, guys. So we're going to put those in the descriptions for the contacts for balancemyhormones.co.uk and so forth. But also subscribe to the channel. If you like these videos, hit the thumbs up, share these videos with your friends. You can leave some comments below. We love your feedback. We'll be next time with more questions. But this has been episode 200 of Ask Dr. Testosterone with Dr. George Tsouliatos. We hope to bring you 200 more. Thank you guys so much for watching these 200 episodes over the last 4 years, right, Doctor? 5 years? 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. And we hope to keep bringing you the best from Dr. T. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Hey, did you like that video? Smash that like button, subscribe to MD, and please comment down below. Thanks for watching.